Welcome to Formation Matters. This is your host, Father Nicholas. Thanks for joining. Welcome to this edition of Formation Matters. Today we're speaking once again about silence. Today about prayer born in silence. This is a theme that I think can be helpful for all of us. It's something that obviously we live a lot more here at the seminary, but something that can really shed light on our lives in general. If we want to pray, we have to learn how to practice and live out silence. Cardinal Robert Serra is a Guinean prelate of the Catholic Church, and since 2010, he is the head of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. So this is a cardinal who comes from the great continent of Africa, and he has to do with the sacraments, so with Mass, confession, etc. He is known as a man of deep prayer, and he wrote a book entitled The Power of Silence Against the Dictatorship of Noise. Interesting title, especially considering all that we live in the modern world and how noise inundates our daily lives. In this book, he explores how silence can help in the modern world, so taken over by distraction and noise. If you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, where it talks about prayer, the 4th section, it also mentions silence. Vocal prayer is an essential element of the Christian life. To his disciples, drawn by the Master's silent prayer, Jesus teaches a vocal prayer, the Our Father. He not only prayed aloud the liturgical prayers of the synagogue, but as the Gospels show, he raised his voice to express his personal prayer, from exalted blessing of the Father to the agony of Gethsemane. That's from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 2701. It is intriguing that the disciples are drawn to Jesus first because of his silent prayer. It is only afterwards that he teaches them the Our Father. Maybe we should conclude that the Our Father came from his silence. This prayer that he taught his disciples, that he taught those who were there, was something that was born from many hours of silent reflection. We know that often in the Gospels, Jesus is portrayed as going away to a lonely spot and praying during the whole night. So first we see that the disciples are drawn to Jesus. The Gospels give witness to people flocking around Jesus. They wanted to hear him preach. They wanted him to lay hands on their sick and cure them. They wanted to touch him. They wanted to see him. The disciples were drawn to him also because of his silence. They had seen the miracles, those very same miracles that the crowds witnessed. They had heard and even repeated his preaching. I don't know if you know this, but the way that Jesus was able to preach to so many people at once is that the disciples would set themselves up among the crowds, kind of like satellites. And so one would hear Jesus and then repeat it to those people who were closest to him, at least on some of the larger occasions. We think that's how the preaching was done. They repeated his very words. They knew his doctrine, and they knew that something was different about him. They felt the same attraction that the crowds felt, but there was something more. And it was this something more that had inspired them to leave their nets, their tax collector's booth, or their family to come and follow Jesus. By spending their days and their nights by his side, they slowly understood what the something more was. He teaches with authority, not like the scribes and Pharisees. This is the beginning of the something more, but does not grasp all of it. At night, there's something different about him. They are worn out and flop down on a bit of ground wherever they are staying and quickly drop off to sleep. But they have witnessed that he does something else. He goes off to pray. They are too exhausted to keep their eyes open, but he is strong enough to pray through the night. His experience of prayer is fascinating to all of them. They see his prayer in silence and know that he is not merely repeating the prayers that all learned at the synagogues while growing up. And second, we see that as well they are drawn to prayer. They are attracted to him in silence. He is not reciting psalms loudly or railing against the evils of society. He is speaking with God the Father, communing with him. This wasn't just an eloquent speaker. This was somebody who, in his prayer, contacted God. The disciples could have gone elsewhere to look for a social activist. How many places could they expect to find a man of God? In this case, he is actually a God man. But we should not expect them to know this, at least not yet. What did his silent prayer bring about in the soul of Jesus? We can imagine that he was peaceful. I imagine him like the waters of the ocean, several feet below the surface. Though there may be storms up above, here things are peaceful, calm, and constant. Perhaps this is what attracted the disciples to Jesus. For most of us who try to pray, we run into difficulties with enough frequency to doubt our own capability. If we keep trying, eventually we will go deeper in a spirit of silence. And finally, I think that the disciples were drawn to silence. They knew that they did not know how to pray. They could repeat formulas, but they did not feel like they had a deep contact with God. Seeing him pray in silence nudged them to try more silence themselves. Perhaps during the years of public ministry, this happened less. It was sufficient to be with Jesus. It was adoration every day, we could say, quite naturally and quite spontaneously. But once he rose to heaven and left them behind, their prayer became more central to their spiritual lives. Now they would have to seek a real contact with God the Father, with Jesus, and with the newfound friend of the Holy Spirit. Men and women of deep prayer are also men and women of silence. Their time spent in study and reflection helps them to prepare themselves for their moments of encounter with God. It is good to measure your own attraction to silence, as silence can be a good indicator of how present God's work is in your soul. Prayer is not about repeating formulas, but about entering into communion with God. So that's our theme for today, how prayer is really born in silence, something that we can see in the catechism, but the catechism that's actually going back to the gospel, that the prayer of Jesus was born in silence, and that there was something special about Jesus that attracted his disciples to him. Before signing off today, I'd like to leave you with a few questions for your own reflection. This can be something you can do maybe this evening before going to bed, or sometime where you're stuck in traffic. But try to bring up these questions into your heart and really contemplate them in God's presence. First off, how are your daily prayers? Could you benefit from a dose of silence? You find it hard to pray? I would challenge you, and I would guess that you're probably not living silence the way you should. Second, how do you imagine that Jesus lived his silence? This can actually be a nice form of contemplative prayer, even just imagining how Jesus went throughout his day, how he lived silence. And the third question, does silence help you to concentrate when you are praying? Think about it. We all have moments where we've tried to pray. Maybe we've all had moments where we get distracted, maybe because there's music in the background, maybe because we're thinking about a television program or something we have to do. And when we really achieve silence, we notice that our prayer is categorically different, right? Well, I hope you like today's content. Please like and subscribe. Invite others as well, because I think these are themes that can help us all grow in our spiritual lives. God bless and have a great day.